Pat Cipollone, NBC News can confirm, will sit down with lawmakers for a transcribed interview behind closed doors. Cipollone, who was in the West Wing during the insurrection, has been mentioned by several other witnesses during the House hearings. According to them, he repeatedly pushed back against the White House efforts to overturn the 2020 election results and often voiced his concerns directly to Trump himself. But until now, Cipollone has refused to cooperate with the House investigation, citing attorney-client and executive privilege. Joining us now, New York Times congressional reporter Luke Broadwater. Luke, good morning. So obviously, Pat Cipollone's name came up a lot in the jarring testimony from Cassidy Hutchinson last week. Seems like he had to now step forward, or at least the committee needed to hear what he had to say to fill in some of those blanks and at least to corroborate some of what she said. How is this? What does it mean to be a transcribed interview? Are we going to see him? What is this going to look like next week?
Yes, this is a very important development for the committee. Pat Cipollone is an extremely key figure who is there for several of the major moments in this plot to overturn the election. And he may know things that we don't even know about yet, that he could reveal to them tomorrow during this interview. I do expect Pat Cipollone's testimony to be played next week at some of the hearings. There was conversations about whether he should testify live in front of the public. Liz Cheney had called for that. But the committee does like to know exactly what a person's going to say before they go up there. They don't want to turn one of these televised hearings into, a food fight. So they like to know exactly what a person's going to say before they decide to put them out there. So I think we'll see Pat Cipollone video clips, but not necessarily Pat Cipollone sitting at the witness stand.
So, and the privilege would be, would it not, from your understanding, legal recommendations he made to the president, anything touching on his representation of the president, where he and the president would have attorney-client privilege, where they're just talking to each other. So I would guess the comments that he made to Cassidy Hutchinson, which would not be privileged.
Yes, that was sort of the sticking point in the negotiations. Everyone concedes that Pat Cipollone does have attorney-client privilege with Donald Trump, and he had sort of resisted coming forward and talking about some of those things. So I don't think we'll see him necessarily talk about direct conversations with Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean he can't talk about lots of other material. We heard Cassidy Hutchinson talk about how Pat Cipollone and Mark Meadows were going back and forth into the Oval Office to try to get Donald Trump to call off the mob. Can he talk about the things he said to Cassidy? Can he talk about the things he said to Mark Meadows? We know he was there for meetings about seizing voting machines. He was there when Bill Barr offered his resignation. He was there when they had draft letters to false draft letters from the Justice Department, and for when he shot down plans from members of Congress and from John Eastman to put forward false slates of electors. I mean, there are so many things that Pat Cipollone knows, and I think his testimony could be absolutely crucial for this committee. And he was probably the biggest witness left that they could get, that they hadn't yet. So, I expect this interview to be very important tomorrow.
Hey, Luke, Jonathan Lemire, certainly aides to the former president concerned the White House counsel now cooperating at least to an extent. Give us a sense, though. This committee has had these hearings so tightly scripted, each hitting a theme, really building towards a narrative. The one they've announced on Tuesday is about the presence of some of these hate groups, the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters, et cetera. Would not seem that Pat Cipollone's testimony would really fit in there. So what's your anticipation as to when we will hear from this White House counsel, when that hearing could look like? What sort of themes might they hit?
I would guess that they use Pat Cipollone's testimony during the final hearing, which we expect to be about what they call the 187 minutes of an action. That's those 3 hours from roughly 1 o'clock past 4 o'clock, where Donald Trump does nothing as the mob is storming the Capitol. We've heard some testimony already that he was agreeing with the mob, that he was endorsing the chants of hang Mike Pence. And we do expect Sarah Matthews' testimony, former deputy press secretary, to be used during that time. And so I think we'll hear a lot from him then. But depending on what Pat Cipollone says on video, this committee has been known to throw out the playbook before, throw out the plan. And if he tells them something they didn't anticipate or found truly explosive, I think we could potentially see that at any time.